Welcome, welcome to the Empowered Team podcast. I'm your hostess, Kari Schneider, and I'm very, very excited to have a guest on today. It's Dr. Ron Stotts. And Ron is an amazing human with all kinds of accolades, but I want to highlight a couple of professional things before I ask you to explain. You're a three-time best-selling author. You have a PhD in psychology, and you're also a chiropractor. I love this, the combination of the mind and the body. This is lighting me up already. And I like this, you've explored the depths of ancient wisdom and the latest psychological, neurological studies and leadership as you guide entrepreneurs and executives to the highest level of conscious leadership. Can I just say yes? Because I spend hour after hour working on things like this with leaders, and I am so excited to learn from you. So tell us a little more about you and what you do and how you got to doing what you do.
All right. Well, simple direction is that I really just my hidden agenda is I want to create a more conscious and caring world.
Mhm.
And I was just in the process of writing my first book, and my publisher really recognized that I have a very unique talent. You see all the leadership books, and they talk about how to take somebody from mid-level to, one of the lower echelons of the higher level of leadership. And what they recognized was that I have the ability to take people into the highest levels of leadership. And as I studied and read more about that, it was something I certainly accepted because I saw what it took, and it was really a description of what I've been doing for 40 plus years and certainly doing with my own life. And what that is it's really two things that the highest conscious leaders and the most successful leaders do is that they really live a mindful life. It really doesn't, yes, they might meditate, do yoga, Tai Chi, martial arts, or whatever, but they also turn whatever they're doing. If they play a musical instrument, if they play golf, if they are talking with their spouse, they're really doing it in a much more present, conscious way that allows that mindfulness to just continue to neurologically rewire their brain for that level of thinking, that level of presence. And the other thing is, significant personal transformational experiences are something that are just a part of their life. And that's really comfortable for me because that's always been a part of my life. And so we really look at bringing that not only into my work, but into their life as a regular challenge that's going on so that they're dealing with that significant personal transformational experience as an opportunity, not as some challenge that has to be overcome. And they see it as just a natural process of their life, and they're evolving into who they want to be, the level of play that they want to be on. So yeah.
I was kind of holding my breath there because I'm like, oh, I'm making notes, I'm doing
Like
all the
that all
things. This
day.
is so good because you're pointing to some of the things that there's lots of quippy sayings. One of them is what gets you here won't get you there. There's,
Absolutely true. Yeah.
we have research around fixed mindset and growth mindset. And
Right.
so much of what you're describing is this ability for us as physiological brains and beings to be able to continue to expand, to continue to grow.
Right.
And when you pointed to in the very beginning, you pointed to your secret agenda, and I'm like, oh yes, this is it, the secret agenda of a more conscious and loving world.
Yeah.
And if if leaders are being supported in more conscious and loving selves or more conscious and loving serving, then to me that result is inevitable, a more conscious and loving world.
Exactly.
It's the
I do
ripple
see it.
effect.
Yeah, I see it. I mean, thinking of one fellow, he's got 5 9-figure national and international businesses, and he came in pretty pretty tough character, and but as he and you said it well, as he fell in love with himself, which allows him to be more present and conscious and emotionally intelligent and aware. He really saw, he had a whole new perspective of what he was doing, how he was doing it, and how he could do it differently. And within months, he was, restructuring his organizations. And, I worked with quite a few of his C-suites and bringing everybody up to speed so that he wasn't having to micromanage everything, which is what he was doing before. And all of a sudden, he really allowed himself to step back and trust and be supportive of the bringing out the best in everyone. And
Mm-hmm.
in working with some of the C-suites, I really saw that how that really enhanced their family life also, not only their life with the people they were working with, but in their family lives, also in their relationship with their partner, their relationship with their kids. It just enhances all aspects of their life, and it does make a more conscious and caring world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it has that ripple effect, and it does work. I just need to reach, but
Oh,
enough to make that become the norm.
absolutely, because it may be the norm for some people, but from a worldwide standpoint may not be the norm. And I am so pleased that you gave a real life example of of someone who's an achiever, someone who is a leader in a company, because in my experience in working with those clients who are in those roles, and having been an entrepreneur for many years as well, the achiever mindset is keep doing, keep doing, keep doing, keep doing. And as I keep doing, then I'm going to be really busy. And if I'm busy and if I'm doing and if I'm accomplishing, then I must be valuable. I must
Yeah.
be important, or I must be worthy in some form or another. And it's this it's this cycle of never ending doing, because there's always going to be another level, there's always going to be another thing, but then this person can feel, as when you described him at first, kind of hard coming in, maybe a little stubborn, maybe a little focused in
Maybe.
what the last,
Just a
and
smidge.
and yet
Mm.
and yet it's literally the opening and the softening that has the person be able to reach so much more. And I don't want to make it sound like much more is better. I expand in
But
such a
it does
profound way.
come, in my first book, Overscheduled by Success. It's really, that's describing exactly what you're talking about. They're so busy being successful that they don't really take the time that every successful person I've ever spoken with, they always have this ideal project or this lifestyle, or, so they don't really step back to take the time to really shift their level of consciousness and awareness and abilities, access the abilities from within themselves to take themselves up to that level, so they're not just staying busy, that they're actually creating the life that they want to be living. And
Mhm.
that's a big difference between being successful and being, whole and complete and self-accepting and feeling like, there's no regrets.
Well, there's I think we've been sold a little bit of a lie. And the lie being that, oh, if you've achieved this, then your life will be like this. And it's this perception that it's going to feel amazing. And yet the feeling that we're all chasing is some form of love and connection. And
Always.
when you described when he learns to love himself,
Right.
then he is able to show up in a way that supports and serves other people in a way that they can show up, and it just exponentially spreads. So this concept of loving oneself, to many high achievers or many achievers continuing on that doing path, that can sound kind of, sometimes it can sound weak, it can sound slower, it can sound like, well, I'm serving other people. Why do I need to, what does loving myself even mean? And
And
so
I've had people say that.
yeah, and so can you describe this? Because I know that for me in my own personal journey, it's been phenomenally transformational in my life and my healing.
Mhm.
So what would you describe as someone when someone's learning to love themselves?
Well, a couple of things just from what you shared is the first thing everybody recognizes in the work is that their personal development is parallel to their professional development. They really go hand in hand. And, so they can't discount, taking care of themselves, loving themselves. And the other thing that all of the research shows, but everybody recognizes soon after they go through the process, is that the more conscious a leader is, the more literally on a big picture, so they're also successful, they're traditionally always they're increasing the organization and their personal profits and productivity by at least 40%. I mean, that's just research. I'll be honest with you, and a lot of my clients kind of laugh at that because they've increased their income and organizational value so much more than
Much
that.
more.
And
Hmm.
all just because it just makes sense. It's like what I'm helping them do is really become more self-aware. That allows them, I work a lot on healing the inner child, taking care of all the things that keep us from loving and accepting ourselves. And that's just the initial part of the work. And that creates a foundation for them to really develop in the life that they want. So many times and I've watched this for decades, as people are building their life on a foundation that just is on sand and it just isn't strong enough. They get to a certain point and all of a sudden it starts falling apart. That's oftentimes when they come to me as they go, geez, I'm trying twice as hard. I'm using all the things that worked before, all of that, sort of cliche attitude. And the truth is, they're ready to grow. Whenever you're
Hmm.
having a challenge, it's nothing, literally nothing but an indicator that a part of you is ready to be healed and grow. And the beauty of that is when you really stop for a moment, learn to breathe in and heal those aspects of themselves that are saying, hey, I'm ready to be healed so you can evolve. You not only evolve, but you access the very part that you need to be able to take your life up to the next level that you're looking towards. And
Hmm.
so it's really beautiful to watch. And that, of course, develops, neurologically, of course, they're redeveloping their mind to that more open, positive mindset. But they're also literally accessing levels of thinking and perspectives that allow them to be more creative, to have greater imagination, intuition. The highest level that I work with is really, what I'm moving them towards is what I call big mind, where yes, they've learned. A lot of times people come in and they're very left brain logically oriented, and they really kind of pride themselves on being stuck in their head and having shut off their heart and gut and the emotional part of life.
I do this. I'm making the line across, like cutting your head off from your body, like nothing else exists that's living from
Yeah,
here on up.
so I have to really get them to breathe into and feel what the rest. I mean, there's a lot of literally the heart and the gut are really part of the brain. I mean, neurologically they are connected, and there's a lot of the same wiring going on. They can't. The problem is when you cut off those parts, there's the brain stem, and then there's the midbrain, and then there's the cortex, the higher level thinking.
Hmm.
Well, if you're not breathing and you're not in your body and present, you're communicating to your body that you're in a fear state. You might not
Hmm.
even psychologically recognize it as that, but it throws everything off, and the chemical gates between that midbrain and cortex begin to shut down. So you
Hmm.
really are diminishing your ability to access your highest levels of thinking,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And
I
then, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say there's a couple points here. One is that I literally on that point have spent time speaking to someone's uh speaking to their wants in a way of, listen, you'll be able to think better and you'll be able to, if you
Yeah,
can, like
yeah,
using
yeah.
using what they are clamoring after in order to try and have them open just a smidgen sometimes. And what you were pointing to, I want to reiterate something that I think our listeners will find so important, is that we think we're building certain things and we think we're doing it with everything that we're accomplishing or achieving. And yet, what's really happening is when we expand or allow ourselves to open from our hearts, we're accessing. And that was the thing that I want to highlight, is that we're accessing what we have innately already within us, instead of learning something, figuring something out, or getting something or accomplishing something. It's actually allowing something to emerge that's always been there. And what I hear, and I've experienced myself, is something along the lines of, well, I always thought I wanted blank, and I discovered that I always had blank. It's always been there, or what I
Mm.
have right now is what I've always wanted. I just didn't know it.
Well, I mean, there's an addiction of people looking outside of themselves for things that can only be found within. And that is
Mm,
really a big part of my training all the way through, is really to support them in learning to trust and access. You know, there's that kind of syndrome that we hear going around, that I'm not enough. And I think people would be startled, they see people and it looks like they've got the ideal life. Well, those are the people that come in and work with me. So
mhm,
I really see that a lot of them really don't feel on a very deep level that they're enough. And of course, it's easy to say, well, no, you're not enough.
mhm.
But the truth is, they're just not accessing enough from within themselves because they don't know how to go within and trust what's available. And that's a
Can
huge difference.
can you share a little bit about, for someone who is listening and they are going, okay, I get what you're saying. I do want more of that. I am on the hamster wheel of, there's so many deadlines. There's so much of this. There's so much that I'm trying to do in my life. How do I learn to trust? How do I learn to go within? What would you suggest for somebody that way?
The art of life is really, well, let me shift. I'm a sailor, so excuse my boating analogies, but when I'm sailing, on the foresail, there's a two little ribbons, two little threads, on one on each side. And as I'm, using the wheel or the tiller, those little threads, if I'm up too high into the wind, the inside one will begin to waver. That tells me, oh, just make a minor adjustment and I fall off and everything's moving fine. If I go too low in the wind, the other one wiggles and so I come up a little bit. Those telltales, those are indicators. And the beauty of that is, if I don't pay attention to those subtle indicators, then the sails start luffing and I'm, lose control of the boat. And, worst case scenario, I, could get in trouble. So we have to be present enough to recognize the abundance of indicators that are in our life. And on a grosser level, one of the indicators is certainly our emotions. So if we're not emotionally intelligent as a leader, we're missing, all the indicators that are telling us ahead of time what we need to be doing, what we need to look at, what we need to breathe into, what we need to pay attention to and deal with. But on subtler levels, so the art of it really becomes, okay, what's the subtlest telltale that I can have in my life so that I can really correct as early as possible in relationship to anything going on? And that subtlest indicator, of course, is your breathing. because your breathing is going to shift if you're feeling consciously or unconsciously any level of stress, any level of discomfort, anything coming into your life that feels challenging or problematic. You're gonna stop breathing. You're gonna shift your breathing. You're gonna go breathe more shallowly. So, fortunately, breathing to me is the gateway to higher consciousness and to being more aware. And so you really can start to become aware of your breath to the point where initially you have to kind of like a stop process that we created in the Brain Integration Center back in the 70s. That, when something comes up, you stop for a moment, you take a few gentle breaths, and then you observe, what am I feeling? What's going on in the circumstances? What, not what I'm reacting to, but what is really going on? And as you're observing, you begin to see what your next best step is. And then you proceed on that step. So stop, take a few breaths, observe, and proceed. And, it's really as structured as that sounds, that's the beginning of practice, of a mindfulness practice. Because after a while, you're just automatically breathing. You're automatically observing and from a curious and conscious place. You're present. And you're always seeing what your next best step is and trusting that and moving forward in that.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, that becomes your way of life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even watch my breathing anymore. My breathing just shifts in relationship to what's most appropriate or supportive for me to move into and through whatever is coming into my life.
Mm-hmm.
And you begin to see that as, oh, it's always perfect if I'm open to it, if I receive it. And as I open to it and move through it and grow, my life continues on the trajectory towards my highest intention, what I'm
Mm-hmm.
breathing into, what I aspire to. You
Well,
know,
that description of that process is beautiful be, to me because you're pointing to not resisting, not avoiding. You're pointing to becoming aware, observing, moving through, and it just being a fluid process, something that is as natural as breathing is, as natural as just living is. And that I think, if I'm going to be thinking about it or pondering about it, I think that that's what we have always been meant for. And it's this uh it's the you pointed to something earlier, the challenge, and I wanted to it's the it's not that the challenge, I can't find where it was, I jotted something down, but it's not that the challenge is an obstacle. The challenge is there for the expansion. I'm putting my own words to it,
yeah,
but
and that's fine. Yeah, I mean, kind of new agey, but the universe turns out to be quite perfect if we learn to trust it. Because, anybody can look at their life, and most of us can recognize that some of the toughest times
mhm,
really turned out to be the best times. I was in the Marine Corps. I got out on a medical discharge, but, I thought that was the toughest year of my life. I mean,
mhm,
it affected my entire life. Well, with hindsight, I look back and it's like, well, yeah, it definitely affected my entire life. It took me into a whatever that word is,
yeah, yeah,
trajectory that I would have never gone on. I would have never,
yeah,
I would have been the
yeah,
all-American boy and gone to work and da 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 and never even taken a look inside for lack of need or,
yeah,
or whatever.
yeah,
And so, to me, it's like the lobster. A lobster, once a year, they begin to feel a niggle or discomfort, and so they know to go into their den, and it's time to shed their old shell. And they wiggle and move and shed that old shell, and it's an incredibly vulnerable time for them. But they also know that if they don't shed that old and grow a new shell, that they'll die.
mhm,
And that's literally, we have to set up our lives so that it supports that evolution. We can't get stuck in a mindset, a comfort zone. A comfort zone to me is like it's a level of consciousness. It's a range of consciousness. In other words, people, it's like, oh, I'm feeling really good today. Oh, I'm feeling really bad. Well, that's a level of consciousness. Somebody else might, their good might be their bad, or somebody
Mhm.
else wouldn't even want to be playing in that realm because it looks so, emotionally draining and dramatic and traumatic and that type of thing. So
Well,
you have to choose your level of consciousness because that's determines how you perceive, experience, and react to everything that comes into your life.
yeah, and it can be more of a diffuse awareness. It can be more of a focused awareness. It can
Right.
expand, it can contract. It doesn't have to be one way. I recall very recently noticing that someone was kind of not in tune, and I ended up saying something like, "Are you it seems like you're checking out instead of checking in
Mhm.
with yourself or others. It seems like you're just checking out a bit instead of checking in." And I think that that's our human coping mechanism for things that we were never taught as children. And ultimately, if our parents didn't teach us, it becomes not their responsibility but our own
Right.
to discover what we needed to learn perhaps that wasn't taught. And what I'm finding so much is that that is to feel that most of us simply have not been taught to feel in a way that is not productive, but rather healthy for ourselves, healthy for our process, healthy for our growth.
Right.
Just to be able to feel something, that act in and of itself, we've been, I think, taught to resist, avoid, react. And
Yeah.
we've got plenty of opportunities. We could go on and on about what's available for us that way. However, it does I humanity potentially a disservice. We're feelers.
Well,
We're
you
not
can't
we're not just thinkers.
you can't be an authentic, whole, self-accepting, loving being if you're not accepting those parts of yourself that as a child growing up, emotional issues come up. There's dramas, there's traumas, there's difficulties. Some of them seem minor to an adult, maybe, but to a child, they might be significant. And so if you're not comfortable, say you look at your family, well, let me just side note. Uh, I've asked this question literally all over the world. What does a child want more than anything else? And the answer is
Their parents' love.
yeah. And they want unconditional love from their parents. And so
Mhm.
they'll do whatever it takes to get that.
Mhm.
And so if the parents kind of move away from them energetically, and that tells them, oh, that part, it's not safe for me to be angry. It's not safe for me to be afraid. It's not safe for me to, feel whatever emotion that I'm dealing with. And so they begin to really, as one of my mentors, Joseph Campbell, said, we've got this cave within, and we just shove all of those disparate parts that we don't feel were acceptable, and all those feelings that we didn't know how to deal with because nobody helped us or we didn't, weren't mature enough to know.
It's
And we shove
interesting.
those into that cave. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because then we get as adults, we're into our, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and we're dealing with the child's needs because the child within us was never given what that child actually needed. And as a real life example of this, I was working with someone who not long ago who's in a company owner, but was acting in an operational role, and some issues were coming up with some of the staff. And the complaint was that this person in their role could not deal with disciplining any of the staff, and it was becoming a problem. And so the question became, well, what are you afraid of? And it
Exactly.
came out so quickly. The response came out so quickly, was being yelled at
Mhm.
and that they won't like me.
Mhm. Right.
And
I see it
and
all
then
the time.
and it was just like, okay. And then it was why? Well, and we explored a little bit, peeled a little bit back, and it was ultimately what they needed and they wanted, what their whole child was begging for, was to feel safe,
Right.
accepted, and loved. And that example, I thought about it afterwards. I was just like, this is all of us. And when we're not having
Right.
those basic fundamental emotional needs met as children, then we are wandering around as adults searching for that in ways that are not, we're looking for it from everyone else, from our partners, from our children, from our businesses, from our accomplishments, and they're never found there. They're literally found within ourselves. And that's where we don't know, well, how do I get that from me? And I'm sharing this personally in that all those little subtle nudges, all of those little signs, I had
Mhm.
years of them until finally it was a matter of, gets knocked right down with an autoimmune disorder, disease, and you can't do anything.
Right.
and and yet I was blind, refused to see any of the things that were along the way. And
Mhm.
ultimately, one of the biggest healing, I mean, among all of the things that I'm doing naturally, one of the biggest healing things for me, some of the people in the audience know that I'm speaking of Graves' disease, but one of the biggest healing things, fundamentally, profoundly, has been literally telling myself, you're safe. I love you. You're safe. I
Mhm.
love you. Everything's okay. I got you. I got you. And it's so simple and it's so vulnerable. I could literally tear up just saying it. And it sounds, to many people, it would just sound so corny. And it has been fundamentally the journey of healing.
Yeah.
Just that simple part.
And we see it. I mean, I see it all the time in leadership where they're really leading from their ego. They're leading with all of their damage, and it's just being spewed throughout the organization. And then they look at, well, how do I get more out of my people, or how do we communicate better? And it has to start with them.
Hmm.
And with what you're talking about is why I really resort, if I can use that word, to really, when somebody comes to me, what I'm looking for is what is that deepest thing? And it's always similar. If I'm in my power, I'll not be accepted, I'll die. And if I love myself, I won't be accepted and people will abandon me and I'll die. And, so there's deep core beliefs that are running them on a subconscious level. And so for me to really make the transformation, they have to really go in and reparent that little child. They have to go in and literally help that child into and through all the emotional backlog. And it takes a couple of months, and then they've got enough of a foundation that when something comes up, they know how to deal with it in a supportive way, and it's not a big deal. But within 2 months, all of a sudden, that they've got a connection. They're looking, instead of looking for love and acceptance outside, they're looking within. They're really paying attention to their breathing, to that inner child. And all of a sudden, they become more emotionally aware. And that self-awareness, of course, then our relationship with ourselves is always mirrored in our relationships with others.
Hmm.
And so it gets mirrored in their relationships with the other people in their organization. All of a sudden they become more emotionally sensitive to their needs, more sensitive to paying attention to creating that safe, supportive environment that you talk about.
Hmm.
And that gets everybody, as I was talking about those telltales, as indicators, when you get your life, once you recognize, and it's a key part of the initial part of my work, is to get them to recognize what their highest intention is, what's their greatest aspiration that they need or want to breathe into. And that should be uncomfortable. It
Hmm.
should be a stretch,
Hmm.
but as they do that, their life just becomes simpler and more easily maintained. But as you get your whole organization in alignment too, to what everybody, is focused on, what the organization is really all about, the underlying, sense of it, the mission statement, but not on just a title on
Yep.
the website, but what
Yep.
we're really about. You get everybody on the same page, everybody is creating and contributing and feeling part of something. And so they give their all, and all of a sudden you have an organization that's increasing their productivity and profits. And the ease of running that organization are so, it's so much easier to do it. That these people find they have more time and there's less effort and stress. And so I see no argument that makes any sense to stick to that old pattern. But you're right, people are scared to death to open those cave doors.
Yeah.
And yet once they do, it really turns into pretty much an adventure for them. I mean, my clients, it's like, yeah, it's scary at first. But once
Mm-hmm.
they do, then that curiosity, because they're smart people, and they go, "Oh, I see that connection. I see that," and they just start, they're on fire, really, and excited about the process of healing and accessing all those parts of themselves that they didn't feel like they could get. So,
And to your point on this what they're experiencing in their lives, what they actually have happened for themselves is that it's not just about their business or their leadership or their productivity. It ends up becoming about their own fulfillment in their own life. It becomes about the relationships with their spouses or their children or their friends, and everything deepens. Everything is
yeah,
so much more connected and profound. And that's where, again, it's like the motion that I made earlier of cutting the head off. It's the same kind of compartmentalization that's happening with everyone else, everything else, as though it's not just all part of one life. It's like, oh, this is my work, and this is my family, and this is my spouse, and this is my health, and they're all in these different buckets,
right,
and they're also very compartmentalized and separate, and we're trying to do the same thing that we're doing with how we think. And it's
right.
it's just it's like I call it fighting reality.
Yeah,
You can
it
keep
is.
trying to act as though
Good way.
as though how you are showing up in this area isn't going to affect
Right.
all those other areas. It just does. It will. We can't help that overlap or bleed or whatever you want to call it into everything else that exists in our world.
Yeah. And that unification makes life so much easier.
Hmm.
It's so much more fun.
It is alignment. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
basically, if you like to think of getting ducks in a row or alignment,
yeah.
or it's that flow or that ease where everything makes sense, instead
Mm,
of trying so hard to separate or trying so hard to have one thing exist a certain way and another thing exist a certain way, because that's what we were taught, or that's what the world is telling us. I there's this last part that I can't help but bring up because I'm curious about how you perceive this with all your experience and how many people you've helped, and how you show up in the world. What is your perception of artificial intelligence in, because it's coming in fast and hard for many,
that's a,
many leaders and companies, and it's been termed very disruptive.
mm.
What are your thoughts on conscious leadership and conscious humanity and artificial intelligence?
I think it's all good. It all depends on what we do with it. It all depends on us, just like everything else.
Hmm.
It's all, if we're in a good state of consciousness and we're paying attention and we're present and we're a conscious leader who's really caring about others, and which really can be, said, well, if I care about the bottom line, well, the bottom line is caring about others also.
Hmm.
And so I think AI is only just going to become a support tool. I mean, I certainly use it, and it doesn't dictate what I end up writing or doing, but it's a helpful tool. It triggers thinking, it triggers ideas. So a lot of that is just going to be determined. You know, it's like Facebook. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it depends
Hmm.
on how we use it.
Yeah, yeah. There's parables about these things.
Yeah.
Um,
So
I
yeah.
love I love how easily that answer came for you. It's just like it's it really depends on us, and considering that AI is learning from us and then teaching itself,
Right.
then there's the answer is if we're teaching it love, we're teaching it kindness, we're teaching it, then that can be replicated in a way that's beyond our comprehension.
Mhm.
And so AI doesn't have to be any different than anything else in how
If
we
it becomes
exist
an
in the world.
enemy, that's just the dark part of ourselves that it's accepted, and
Hmm.
using. So it's really, yeah, bring your best to it. It'll be, one of your best tools, but bring
Hmm.
your worst to it, and it'll degrade the universe. I mean,
And on that point, it's that is the wholeness, would you say? Is that it's not about only being not about only being one thing. It's not about only, we all have a shadow side. We all have a side that is the antithesis to whatever. And it's being able to embrace all of that that really has us be able to see and be aware without making something wrong, without fighting and battling, without, trying to divide ourselves and that kind of thing. Would you expand on that or agree or disagree?
well, I certainly agree because it's like Joseph Campbell said, we have to enter the cave within to discover that treasure that we seek. I'm sure I've modified what he said, but anyway, uh, the truth of it is that treasure within that we're seeking is that unconditional self-acceptance and love that we've wanted all of our life.
Hmm.
I have, 50, 40, 50, 60-year-olds coming in here all the time who, when they really get down to it, they still want that. And
Hmm.
the great thing is well, good. Now you can have it because
Hmm.
all you have to do is learn to heal and accept and unconditionally integrate all aspects of yourself. And that's how you become whole. That's how you become an authentic person. That's how
Hmm.
you become a higher level, leader. And the beauty of that is you are smarter. You are more, you're much more agile. You're much more capable of handling it. You're like a surfer on a big wave. You're not going, oh my God, what do I do next? You're
Yeah,
you're just
because
in that flow.
you're not afraid of you're not afraid of the dark. you know, you're
Right.
not afraid
Well,
of the dark
it isn't
anymore.
dark anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and that I imagine, especially not avoiding or being afraid, or that is part of what allows our brain to open up new neural connections and create
Hugely.
greater neuroplasticity and our ability to learn and expand when we're not putting these limiters on ourselves because we don't want to look, or we've been conditioned just to try and be a certain way.
And I would emphasize for your audience, it's not that we don't want to be afraid. We just want to recognize that when we do feel a fear, that's just an indicator that's serving us to look deeper, to heal, and access more of who we are. So fear is really nothing but that little indicator that helps us guide through life. And that's true for all of our emotions. If you're not emotionally intelligent, you really have just limited your ability to, well, to enjoy your life, but also to be any sort of high level leader and capable of
Mhm.
running an organization because you have to just have that agility. I mean, I just touched on it before, but it's the highest, there was a research by, I think it was IBM, 1,500 of the top CEOs in the world. And I think it was like 70% of them acknowledged that they just didn't feel capable of doing their job, which I
Mhm.
was a little, I wasn't surprised that that was the number, but that they would acknowledge that.
Mhm.
But within that study, there was about 7% who were just having a ball. I mean, they were just
Mhm.
having a great time and a lot of success, and then all of those, that 7% were really had developed that mindset of being present and mindful, that mindset of personal development and continued growth, evolving, and and they were having fun with life. Yeah, they
Mhm.
weren't trying to control it. They were going with the flow and really recognizing how to, peak performance isn't about building your energy, and it's about being absolutely present
Mm-hmm.
and trusting and
Mm-hmm.
really being grateful for whatever's coming into your life and trusting that and healing it and growing with it so you can become who you are meant to be. It's just,
I,
man,
I
that's the
love this, and I love the ulterior motive you have in creating the loving and conscious world, because and doing it through leadership, it completely lights me up.
yeah,
Are there any last thoughts of what you would want to share as a best piece of advice that you've received or you'd like to impart to others or you wished you heard when you were in your teens or 20s? Is there anything
yeah,
you'd like to share as a message to our listeners?
that's a good question. I think, the simplest share that I can give you is begin to watch your breathing. When are you breathing full and deep? When do you breathe more shallowly? When do you find yourself not breathing at all, even for an extended period? And recognize that that is your primal indicator, because when you're not breathing, you're disconnected from yourself and others. So you're not accessing the best of who you are. You're accessing a very limited aspect of who you are. It's coming from the amygdala, the fight or
Mhm.
flight response. And so you want to start paying attention to your breathing, and you want to pay attention to it to the point where just doing that simple stop process where oh, I'm not breathing. Good. Well, I'll take a few breaths. I'll become curious. I'll become present. I'll see what my best option is, and then I'll feel more comfortable proceeding.
Mhm.
Because it's fear that keeps us held down. It's fear that keeps us from playing the level we want to play on. But the fear is not the bad thing. It's your response to it. It's your perception of it. I find that if you can't find an answer, all you need to do is breathe and move into a higher state of consciousness to where that question and answer are available.
Mhm.
So it's you can always look within. You can always trust, and everybody trusts the trying and efforting. Well, I would ask them to trust the silence. I would ask
Yes.
them to breathe into the silence and see the ability to
Yes.
create and really come up with their highest level thinking from that inner silence that's there.
And trust their own patience, trust their own ability. So
Exactly.
beautiful. There's one thing I wanna leave with something that you had said earlier,
Mhm.
and it's that one of the best pieces of advice that you'd been given is to quiet your mind and open your heart.
Indeed.
There we go. Well, with that, I am so grateful for the work that you've done with creating more conscious leaders, and very, very thankful that you've been able to come on and share some
Yeah,
of your
thank you.
wisdom with us. So
Yeah,
thank you so much.
yeah,
And for our listeners, they can find you on LinkedIn. You've got Facebook at ronstotts.50. You've got personal LinkedIn at Dr. Ron Stotts, and you are on YouTube as well, Dr. Ron Stotts.
yeah,
And we will post this video on YouTube as well and make sure that your audience and our audience get to share and find you.
yeah. And
So
they're always welcome to call me in a discovery call and just explore where they are, what they need, and that's not a sales call. That's a really let's help people as much as we can and serve and support.
excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent. I encourage everyone to we'll have a link in the show notes. So we'll put this link in the show notes and check that out so that you can have that discovery link. That would be amazing.
yeah, good.
Okay,
Oh,
reach
hey,
out to
well,
Dr. Ron Stotts, and thank you so much.
well, I enjoyed it, and thank you, everybody.